Blake and Devin Podcast.
Let me tell you.
Oh, you interrupted me right at the start, man.
Hey, this is going to be a long podcast. I hope you all are ready for this.
Dang it.
Welcome to the Blake and Devin Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Devin, and across the way is your other host, Blake Robertson. And today, our guest is Justin Black, theologian extraordinaire and musician for the God, for the triune God. He is a worship leader at his church in Danville, and we are also a youth leader, youth pastor at his church in Danville as well. And we're so glad to have him on the podcast today. How are you guys doing? Everybody good?
Good.
Justin knows not to talk until it's time to talk. we got our guest beat down good like we want him. Okay. Well, we're glad that you've joined us again. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. We enjoy doing this, and we hope that you're enjoying it as well. Let us begin with memes of the week. And Justin, you brought a very special meme. Now I do all the impression voiceovers for this.
Except for last week when you put me on the spot.
Well, I try to get you to do something once in a while. Okay. This is, okay, here we go. First one. I just got the new Worship Leader Study Bible. It repeats the last verse of each chapter 7 times.
Nice.
Nice. Okay. Somebody's trying to trigger somebody else on this podcast. All right. Here's mine. I don't always say you've got to have faith, but when I do, it's in a sarcastic, prudish tone, and I truly have nothing intelligent left to say. Controversial? Bad? Somewhat?
Whose is that?
Well, clearly it's not yours.
Yeah, well, for sure.
No, we don't have people guess every single week, so I'll tell you this one's mine. But you could have guessed it.
I thought so. Yeah. Never mind. I won't say anything. Yeah.
What does that mean? I don't even want to know what that means. Jeez, that's
just move along.
All right, here's Justin.
My meme was 28 shot at you, Justin. Yeah.
There is alcohol in that picture. We might have to edit that out. I didn't see that till just now.
That is not very Baptist of you. Okay,
so here's Justin. And Justin brought along one of my favorite things, which is an Amazon review. I love funny Amazon reviews. I actually have others that we haven't talked about, but they're very funny. So let me read this one. It's about a giant. I love that it's called Behemoth in the title of the ball. It's called a beach Behemoth giant inflatable 12-foot pole-to-pole beach ball. This is the review. Everybody's cracking up. A fun way to ruin a weekend and blow $100. All right, here's the review. We took this ball to the beach, and after close to 2 hours to pump it up, we pushed it around for about 10 fun-filled minutes. That was when the wind picked it up and sent it huddling down the beach at about 40 knots. It destroyed everything in its path. Children screamed in terror at the giant inflatable monster that crushed their sandcastles. Grown men were knocked down trying to save their families. The faster we chased it, the faster it rolled. It was like it was mocking us. Eventually, we had to stop running after it because its path of injury and destruction was going to cost us a fortune in legal fees. Rumor has it that it could still be seen stalking innocent families on the Florida Panhandle. We lost it in South Carolina. We lost it in South Carolina, so there is something to be said about its durability.
I love how it got a 2-star. It got 2 stars. How did you not get a 1 or a 5?
Not a 1 star. Not a 1 star, a 2-star. Oh gosh, that was great. That's great. Okay, I hope you Hope people got a laugh out of that like we did, because man, that's really funny.
I'm glad you read it because I would have never made it through that. So I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Blake, are you ready for this day in history?
I am.
Today in history, June 13th, 2020.
This day in history. This is so interesting to me. It might not be interesting to anybody else, but this is interesting to me. In 1920, the U.S. Postal Service had to issue a statement that parents could no longer mail their children. This is facts, okay?
There's a reason for every law, though.
Listen, people were mailing their children because it was cheaper than buying a ticket on a train.
Oh my gosh.
So there you go. This day in history. Also, it is Tim Allen's birthday. I'm really big fan of Tim Allen. So
yeah. Tim the Toolman Taylor.
Tim the Toolman Taylor. Also,
Buzz Lightyear.
I don't know why. Every time I do this, there's always something baseball related. Today was Babe Ruth's last game played in Yankee Stadium, June 13th.
Okay. Yeah, we always have a baseball. We should just this day in history and baseball. That's what we should call this now. This
also, last thing, the movie Grease debuted today in history.
I feel like Justin's probably a big Grease
fans out there, but big Grease following. But it was a big
Justin,
hit.
You're probably a big Grease fan, aren't you?
No, it's a weird thing. I'm not a big fan of musicals. I never have been, and people think that's weird because as a musician you should be a fan of musicals. But when I'm watching a movie, I like to follow the storyline of the movie, and so for me, I'm like, let's get the song over with so we can move on with the movie. So I'm really not a big fan of Grease or any other musical.
I got you.
What do you think? What do you think about Grease?
I think that I haven't seen it.
Oh man! Oh,
it didn't fit into the homeschool curriculum, so here we are. All right. Well, Justin, let's introduce you right off now. So tell us the name of your church and the position title you have, and how tell us about your family, just briefly.
Okay. I don't do anything briefly. We have already figured that out because what the people don't know is we've been talking for an hour and a half before we've hit the record button. So I don't do anything briefly, but I will attempt to be brief. I am the worship pastor and youth pastor at Calvary Baptist Church here in Danville, KY. That is my title. I am married to my wife, Natasha, and we have 3 kids, 2 girls, and 1 boy we recently adopted. So that's the short end of it.
I thought you had 10 kids.
No, that's Blake. You've got the wrong guy.
That's right. Blake has a lot of children. Neither Justin nor I will be able to keep up.
And he's still working on it.
He is still working on it. That is absolutely
apparently.
So. Yeah. That's
got one growing right now in the oven.
Got one growing in the oven. That's weird. Usually you say bacon in the oven, and he said growing in the oven. So he's got a whole situation going on over there.
Bacon, growing.
Whatever. It's in there. Yeah, I got you.
Something's going on.
Moving quickly. So
you
Justin
may edit that out.
We want to.
Oh no, he'll definitely leave that in. That's definitely staying in.
Oh, that is staying in, buddy. Don't tell me what to edit things, man. That's the worst thing you can do. Okay. We had Justin on here today because we want to grill him in regards to the youth ministry and the how he's managed youth ministry through the coronavirus, but also just some theological questions regarding youth ministry. So let's let Blake take off first with his question. Or some.
All right, Justin. Do you think there are differences between ministering to youth rather than adults? And if you do, what are they?
I mean, that's a good question. I do think there is a difference in the way we go about ministering to youth and the way we go about ministering to adults. And so let me be very clear about what I mean by that. I think that I think that teenagers can handle deep biblical truths. And we'll probably get into this more as we go along in our conversation here. But one of the downfalls of youth ministry, specifically in the 21st century, has been that there hasn't been a lot of rich theology as a part of the really the vital part of what youth ministry is all about. And so I still think we can be biblical. I still think youth ministries can be rich in their theology. And I think we can teach deep truths. But I also believe there's a different way we go about teaching teenagers than we would go about teaching adults. And I actually think that it is a scriptural concept. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, a very famous verse, train a child up in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So scripture actually makes a distinction, right, between a child, a teenager, and a adult. So what is the difference? There is a training season. So ideally what happens is you have the milk and the meat. And we know this as pastors. We know that some people are on the milk, some people are on the meat. And so with youth, with teenagers, with students, what we do as student pastors is we try to give them good, rich theology, deep truths that they need to hear, but we do it in a way that they can understand, that they can connect with, and that is real to them. And so I think the only difference that I would say is that there's a difference in the way we go about ministering to students. There isn't a different message, but there is a different way we go about ministering to students.
That leads right into one of the first questions I had, and that is, so the Proverbs that you quoted there is in reference, and most of the Proverbs are written from a father to his son, and a lot of masculine pronouns there. Not that ladies can't get anything out of it, but this is who was writing to who. It's just a historical fact. There was wisdom being passed down from a father to his son in a lot of the Proverbs. In this particular instance, train up a child in the way he should go. There is a mention of a child. Now, of course, historically and biblically, there was no concept like we have invented in America of adolescence, of youth, of a period where you're between childhood and adulthood. The concept for the Hebrews was you're 13, you build a house, you get a wife, you go along. They think Mary was probably 12 or 13 at the youngest when she had Jesus. So there was no adolescence. Therefore, as a youth pastor, it's sort of a two-part question. Do you justify youth ministry biblically? How do you justify youth ministry biblically? Do you do it by saying, well, we're equipping the whole family? Or do you justify it some other way? And then within that question is also implicit of how do you help parents fulfill Proverbs of training up their child?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, when you look at the Bible, and you, as you've said, and you look at training up children in the way that they should go, who does that responsibility typically fall upon? It's the parents, right?
Right.
I think anyone who's studied Scripture to any degree would really agree with that. So the thing we have to remember is that for those of us who are fathers who love and serve the Lord, that makes sense. I am a youth pastor, but if I wasn't a youth pastor, because I've studied the Word, I would know that my youth pastor, my hypothetical youth pastor, of course, is not primarily responsible for training my child up in the way that they should go. That's my responsibility. So here's the difference, okay? As a youth pastor here in Danville, which is where I happen to be right now, I have a lot of people in our youth ministry who do not have a spiritual father. Spiritually, they are orphans. They do not have a father figure in their life. They do not have someone who can train them up in the way that they can go. And so here's one of the fundamental things that's happened in youth ministry over the years. We've realized a lot of the mistakes that we made in the 90s and at the dawn of the 21st century, which was we just get kids in here, we just have fun, we just keep them here, and as long as our numbers are up, we're good to go, right? And we've put them all in the same categories. We've really ministered to them all the same, which is really crazy because we wouldn't do that. Like a senior pastor, you wouldn't do that. You minister in a lot of ways in an individual level. Am I right? I mean,
Yes.
You wouldn't minister to a brand new believer the way you would minister to someone who's been following Christ faithfully for 30 years. And so we've really seen the youth as like this whole, to where we just minister to them all the same. That's not a healthy way to minister in the local church. And so as a youth pastor, what I do is I have to be intentional, and I have to say, okay, here are my parents who follow Christ, and they claim to follow Christ. And so what I need to do, the best thing I can do for their student is to equip the parent. Because as we've already said, biblically, that's the way it's supposed to happen, right? So the best thing I can do is not organize a lock-in, and I do lock-ins. The best thing I can do is not pack them all up and send us off to youth camp, which I do every summer. The best thing I can do for that child is to equip the parents and do everything I can to help them see that it is their responsibility to train their child up in the way that they should go. Now, let's flip the roles here. I also have students in my youth ministry who they don't come from a Christian home. They don't come from a Christian background. They don't know anything about Christ. And so that is where I see my responsibility of stepping in there and really being responsible for training that teenager, training that student in how to follow Christ, how to love the church, and ultimately to love Jesus. And so I don't think I can make a real blanket statement, to your question, because I think we have to, as youth pastors, what we do is we handle it case by case. There's some parents that need to hear the hard truths of you're primarily responsible of training your child in the way that they should serve Christ because you are a Christian. And on the flip side of that, we have unbelievers in our church that God has graciously given to us for us to minister to. And so we have to step in there and be that for those students. Does that answer your question? I don't know if it does.
Absolutely.
Or not.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, that's really
I
helpful,
ran around
Justin.
a little bit.
No, that was really good. That leads into one of my questions, and that is, what would you say to us as mom and dads? And maybe you're speaking to mom and dads in Danville as well. But what would you say to us? What would be one of the things that you tell us that we can do better to help our youth, to help our children at home?
Be intentional. That I think that's the best piece of advice that you can give to parents. I don't. You guys are gonna get me going here tonight. I don't care how busy you are. If you are so busy that you cannot sit down and study the Word of God with your child and to pray with your child, you need to cut some things out of your life. Because in the grand scheme of things, the only thing that's going to matter, right? It's not about soccer. It's not about all these extracurricular activities that you can get your child involved in. There is eternity waiting for every single one of the students that I minister to week. And so what I want to say to parents everywhere is that you have to be intentional, okay? You have to be intentional about studying the Word of God with your child. Open up the Word of God with your child. You know, you're tired, you get home, you've you didn't have time to eat because you were out all night at the soccer game, and you picked up Happy Meals and you said, cram down this cheeseburger on the way home. You get home, it's 10:30 at night. Open up the Word of God. It's the most important thing that you can do with your children. Open up the Word of God. And even if you read a few verses before they fall asleep, that's the most important thing you can do with them every single day, and to spend time praying for your children. There is no excuse to pretend like scriptures like Deuteronomy 6 don't exist. There's no excuse for that. We as parents, and we're seeing as our world changes, and maybe we'll get into this more in a second, we're seeing as our world changes more and more that our teenagers are constantly hearing a secular worldview that does not line up with biblical Christianity. Constantly, all the time. And for us to not be intentional about discipling our children, we're setting them up for massive failure. So my advice would be to parents, stop making excuses and be intentional when it comes to discipleship within the home.
And I hear what you're saying, and want to make sure that if a parent's watching this, that there's grace for your failings. If you failed in this area, there's grace for you, that you can start today. You can ask for forgiveness. You can start today. You can pursue the Lord, and He'll provide the grace for you if you failed in that area. But the mandate and the push is real. You might not be a believer, or you might be an undisciplined child in the faith if you don't see the importance of it, or if you're not doing it in your own life, you won't relay that to the importance it should have in the life of your child. Right. I've been a youth pastor before as well, Justin, and that there are kids sent to your youth group by parents or grandparents who want to Christianize them. They don't prioritize it in their own life. They just send them off to get some Jesus because they think it's good for them, but they don't personally do anything with that in their own life. And that always drove me nuts, is to see that they would have that disconnect between what's important for their child, what's important for them. And so I guess I'm just adding on to what you're saying in a little bit. The precursor is, it should be important enough in your own life. You should discipline yourself to do it enough that you recognize its importance, so that you're extending that to your child. It's not just your child's, it's not just your goal for your child that you get them saved, as if that's not something that applies to you. Right. So here's the follow-up question then. That mentality of, it's all about sports, it's all about school, it's all about academics, I'm going to get my kid to be successful being defined as a worldly success, not as a spiritual successful, but as a worldly successful. That mentality comes with a sort of a weight of pushing them to enjoy their childhood. And it even extends now in our world, where you'll be successful, you'll continue to go through school, but you're going to have a lot of fun through that. And so there's a sort of a perpetual childhood our culture pushes people into. So once you turn 13, you're in your teenage years. Then you're 20. Now you're supposed to go sow your oats and play and date around and all these things associated with sort of just this perpetual youth. And so when you get married at 20 years old, you're a full-fledged adult. But people are like, 20? You got married at 20? That's just mind-bending that you would be married at that age. And I was, and it blew people's minds. I'm still married, So my question is, do you think that America's push toward perpetual youth is part of the mental health crisis?
Well, yes, first of all. But let me respond to something you said there a second ago first before I answer your
Yeah.
question. I didn't mean to come off as like ungracious or anything like that, and I hope people don't see it that way.
No,
But I
not at
think
all.
sometimes, but I feel like if people are watching this podcast, they are Christian parents, probably for the most part, right? And so I hope that came out as more of like a loving kind of kick in the rear end than like me just being mean and judgmental. So I just want to say that if it came across as ungracious, I really didn't mean for it to be that way.
I received it as passionate, and I appreciated it. So I think that's the way it'll be received across the board.
It's really, really good.
I hope so. Well, your question about delayed adolescence, I think is a really good question. I do see it as a problem, absolutely. And what you asked specifically was, does it play a part in mental illness that we're seeing? Because there's no doubt about it that the stats don't lie. We can see that mental illness is increasing all the time. There is a very interesting book that I would suggest for people listening to read, to pick up, and to check out. I do want to be very clear that it is a secular book in a lot of ways. It doesn't come from a biblical background, but I still think the content that's in the book is helpful. Sure. As far as this delayed adolescence problem and things that we have going on. So the book is called The Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you guys have heard about that before, but it's all about delayed adolescence and how youth have changed over time, and how we used to view youth as, when you're 18, then you go off, you do your own thing, you're an adult, and now it's, and then it was 25-ish, and now it's 30, and we keep pushing that off, and it's a really interesting book, but in chapter 1 of the book, it talks about this test that they did with peanut allergies. And so I know that sounds weird, but let me go through the illustration here, and then I think it'll really help for the conversation that we're having. Like I said, I'm never brief, so get ready. But they did a test, and they knew that we are seeing rises in peanut allergies in America. Okay, and you guys know this because serving in churches and being around things going on at school, there's always a consciousness of peanut allergies, and there's certain things that we can't serve and things like that. But the peanut allergies over the years have quadrupled in number over the past 20 or 30 years. And so there was a research team that really did this experiment. The group was called LEAP. You can look up this experiment. In 2015, what they did was they took a large number of children. They took 640 children, and they divided them up into 2 groups. And they said, okay, in this group, what you're going to do from the time your child is like 6 months old, you're going to, in small doses, give them peanuts, peanut butter and things that have peanuts in them. And then with this group over here, you're not going to do that. What they found out, the stuff that they found out was really amazing, because among the children who had been protected from the peanuts, 17% had developed a peanut allergy. Okay. And in the group that had been deliberately exposed to the peanuts, only 3% had an allergy. Okay, so we're talking about 17% compared to 3%, right?
Yeah.
So we've exposed this group to peanuts from the time they were babies, and they're 17%. We've not exposed this group, and only 3% we've exposed this group, and only 3% have. 17% that were not exposed got the peanut allergy. Does that make sense? Sorry, I kind of got lost there.
Right, yeah.
So the ones that were exposed, in other words, they gained immunity, and they didn't have peanut allergies for the most part. What does this mean? It means that the ones who were coddled and the ones who were really not exposed to peanuts, they ended up getting the allergy. And I think there's a spiritual illustration here. And the author of this book points this out. He says that there are spiritual implications to this. There is a phenomenon in our country called lawnmower parenting. Are you guys familiar with this? Have you ever heard this expression before? It's basically, I'm going to knock down any obstacle. I'm going to mow over any obstacle that might hurt my child from the time they are born until the time they are whatever age I think they become an adult, which we've already said is growing and growing all the time. So I'm going to knock down any obstacle that might be in my child's way, because that's going to help them. That's going to be what they need to really achieve in this life. I'm going to do everything I can to knock down any kind of obstacle that may come up. And what is happening is that our children are not gaining spiritual immunity. They don't have the responsibilities. You know, if you go back and you talk to your grandparents about their daily life when they were children, it's a lot different than it is today. Am I right? I mean,
Right, yeah.
they were working, they had responsibilities, they had all kinds of things that they had to do, and they were contributing to society in a very real way. And we're talking about when they were 13, 14, 15 years old, right? And so what we've done is we've said, well, I don't want to give my children too many responsibilities, and I don't want to give my children, you know, too many issues. And if anything comes up, I want to do everything I can to protect them. And I want to try to just give them anything that they might want or need. And what's really happened is, in a spiritual sense, we are killing their immunity. And so when they become 18, 19 years old, we've protected them their entire lives. If they mess up, we blame the teachers. If they're not playing, we blame the coaches, you know, all these things. And we send them off into the world, and they don't know how to be adults because they've never had to take responsibility for themselves. They've never had to take ownership for their own actions. And they have really never been challenged in a significant way, because every time they were challenged, their parents said, well, that was hard for you, so don't worry about it. It's okay. Everything's good. Just forget about that. You know, that was challenging for you, so let's try something else. I firmly believe that a lack of self-discipline in our teenagers is one of the very worst problems that we have in this country right now, that we are not showing teenagers how to take responsibility. We are not showing teenagers how to be adults because they're on the verge of adulthood. Right? You think about, so 15 years old, you know, that doesn't seem too old to us, right? That seems like a very young person. But in our country, we say that when you're 18-year-old, you're an adult. So there's a 3-year difference between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. Now, as adults, we look back 3 years ago. Does that seem like an extremely long period of time?
Yeah.
Not really.
Oh, it doesn't.
Not really. Depends what you've gone through, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
But we're talking about children who are 3 years away from being legally adults.
Yeah.
And they have no clue how to take ownership. They have no clue how to be self-disciplined. And it's just this society we've created. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm interrupting you. You finish.
No, you go ahead. I've talked enough.
This very concept is what there's a clip. I was actually, Blake and I were talking about it. There's a recent clip of Jordan Peterson discussing the story of Sleeping Beauty. And he basically illustrates exactly what you're talking about with the story of Sleeping Beauty, saying that the original story, which was a grim fairy tale, not the Disney story that we're familiar with, but the grim version of Sleeping Beauty, is a young girl who's a princess whose parents keep her from Maleficent her whole life. Maleficent being the embodiment of evil and the things that come with a fallen world. And so when she's old enough to be curious and she leaves, when she encounters Maleficent, she can't handle it. She can't handle that the world's evil, it doesn't work right, and that things are hard. And ultimately, the spell represents the fact that she can't stand against Maleficent. She is not exposed to it. She wasn't ready for it, and ultimately goes to sleep. And he's a clinical psychologist, and so he and I may differ on some things, but one of the things he says is that the kiss that wakes Sleeping Beauty up is supposed to be that her consciousness basically saying it's time to grow up and get on with it now.
Right.
And of course, there's a lot to unpack there, but the illustration is exactly what you're talking about. The coddled mind, like that book, prevents children and then teenagers from seeing adulthood as the thing they need to prepare for, and instead it's a perpetual state of youth, which never allows them to be disciplined enough to handle the real world. I love that point. I'm glad that you said that. Blake, you're up. Next question.
Well, I just want to say something too about what Justin said. What you said about 3 years, so 15 to an 18-year-old, an adult, what we call an adult in America. I have a son getting ready to turn 15 this year. So what you just said really hits home with me. And as I parent and as I instruct and discipline, all of that is to prepare him for adulthood, to take responsibility for his actions, to not just do something, but do something to the best of his ability, and to do it right the first time, to do all those things. And it's all to say, this is going to be expected of you as an adult. Let's figure it out now so that when adult life hits you, you're prepared. So thank you for that, because it truly, it just hit home with me just now. So thank you for that. And I hope people are out there listening to this, because it's great stuff. Thank you. One question I had, what are some tools that you use to help your youth group out right now?
Yeah, so for me, I can only talk about what's worked for me, and the things that I do, that I've seen have really been useful and edifying in our ministry at our church. And so I really think that the number one thing that not just student pastors, but really any pastor can do is connect with their people. I think the best thing that I can do as a student pastor is to let my students know that I care for them, right? I think a lot of people in ministry are perfectly content with seeing their people for 45 minutes a week and then sending them off on their own. And so for me, there is a huge power in presence. If I really want to be able to do deep, rich ministry within the church, there has to be a presence. There has to be a level of connectivity that happens with students where they don't just see me as the guy that shows up and talks about whatever for 30 minutes. I need to be more than that. I need to be a shepherd. I need to be a pastor for them. And so I think that the number one thing that we can do really as youth pastors is to be intentional about the way we connect with our students. And I think that's something that, again, it's not just something for youth ministry. I think it's for pastoral ministry in general. And I know it's cliche, and I know people say it all the time, but I think people say it because it's true about how people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's so true with youth ministry. The best thing that any youth pastor can do is be present and to be a shepherd for the students, right? And there's a lot of ways you can do that. There's a lot of ways that you can connect with them. We're all have some connection to Owen County. And so you guys know my story that I was at Dallasburg in Owen County for a little over 3 years. And so what I would always do is I would try to have the students over to my house, and we would watch games and we would watch wrestling pay-per-views, because that's what I'm into. And then I taught them to really be into the good things in life, like professional wrestling. And so they would come over for stuff like that. And in those moments, what you're doing is you're developing friendships and you're developing relationships. And so then when a student is having a real issue, a spiritual issue, guess what? They feel comfortable coming up to you and talking to you about what's going on in their heart and their life because they see you as a friend and they see you as someone who is for them and someone who is really wanting to see them grow spiritually. And they believe that. And so for me, I know there's all kinds of different programs, and with your question there, I don't know if you're asking about curriculum or programs or things like that. To me, in ministry, period, not just youth ministry, presence is the number one thing. If people know you love them, you can minister to them. If people know you care about them, they'll allow you to shepherd them. And that's kind of always been my way of approaching ministry.
Let me just say this too, is I have personally seen this work in your ministry, Justin, because I've personally talked to youth that you minister to. And what you just said there, the connection, the friendship, helping them in their Christian walk is 100% true. I know that to be a fact. So, connection is a great tool, because when they need help, they need an answer to a question, you will be the first person they come to because you have that connection. So, great stuff.
Absolutely, man. I could talk to you just on and on and on. It's really helpful and also really fascinating. You spur lots of thoughts. Unfortunately, it cannot go on forever. The podcast must end. And so what we do is we typically put people on the hot seat. So at this point, we're going to start the hot seat, which will be a graphic here. And then we're going to set a timer, and we're going to go ahead and put you on the hot seat because we would like for you to play us out with a song. And so we're going to do the hot seat now, so we have a little bit of time at the end for you to do that as well, okay?
All right.
Okay, so we set the timer for 2 minutes, and then Blake doesn't believe in taking notes, so he just wings it, and you never know what you're going to get. So this will be fun.
Surprise me.
Okay, are we ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
So hold on. Wait, am I supposed to answer the questions like as quickly as I can?
Yes, it's hot. It's hot seat. You want to get off of the seat. It's hot. It's burning you. So you want to answer these questions until you get out of it.
I've already said I'm not brief. This is not made for me. But okay, go ahead. I'm ready.
This is the part of the podcast where we like to stretch our guests and sanctify them a little bit.
I'm ready.
Okay. So, 1 word to 1 sentence answers. Like you gotta really hit it and forget it. Okay.
I'll try. Let's do it.
All right. Start the timer and go.
Justin, I need a full impersonation of your favorite wrestler.
Well, let me tell you something. There's nothing better than the best, and I'm the cream of the crop, and there will never be anybody better than the Macho Man, Randy Savage. And when I step into the ring tonight with that dirty dog who is the $1 Million Man, yeah, I'm going to take him for everything he's worth, and you're going to know that the Macho Man has come to Madison Square Garden. Yeah, dig it.
40
Something like that.
seconds of an impersonation. 40 seconds. He could have said 3 words, and I would have been like, "That's okay." On with it. All-time favorite movie.
Forrest Gump.
What?
Yeah, because it's the movie that keeps on giving. Every time I watch it, I notice something I've never noticed before. So it's a great movie.
Blake, go.
All right, favorite band.
Are we talking secular or are we talking a Christian
Both.
group?
One of each. One of each.
Okay, yeah, one of each.
Okay. I'll start with secular group. Probably Led Zeppelin. They had a huge influence on my childhood, and there's just some really good musicianship in that band all around. So yeah, I've always been a Led Zeppelin guy. As far as a Christian group is concerned, I mean, the thing that we listen to the most right now is like Sovereign Grace, and we listen to the Gettys and stuff because our children, they make songs that are singable. They make songs that, you know, people can latch on to, and that you know, are memorable. And so our kids really are into the Gettys, and so we end up listening to them a whole lot.
Very
Alright.
good. All right. Well, I'm not going to ask any bonus hot seat questions tonight because I want you to be able to play us a little song.
Okay.
You sing and play, and you typically play the guitar, but you're gonna do the piano tonight.
Well, that's only because I don't have a guitar with me right now.
How do you
First time
play the
ever.
guitar and not have a guitar at your house? This is unfathomable.
Well, because I'm poor and I only have one guitar, and right now it happens to be at the church. So
We're gonna put you're making me want to put that donate button onto my video so that people can send you.
GoFundMe for a new
Yeah.
Martin guitar. GoFundMe.
Hey, but that poor man should always keep his guitar around to make a buck or two.
Yeah,
Well, he's about to do
Yeah.
something with the piano.
yeah. I can do something for you. Do I have a few seconds to move over to the piano?
Yes, let us just say that before you go over there, so that we can say thank you for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate you, and I'm so glad to see you again, and I'm glad things are going well. So thanks for being on.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All right, go
All
set
right,
up.
so
Play us a
you want me to
song.
move over here?
Yeah. While
All
he's
right.
getting set up, Blake and I want to remind everybody to talk about the podcast, to comment in the sections, because the more you comment and talk and start discussions about what we've talked about today, the more that you're able to make the video go to the top of people's news feeds, which just makes it seen, which would generate more content on your page, because Facebook wants us to pay them money in order to show more people the video. But if you comment and like and share it, then we don't have to pay that money, and people will get to enjoy the podcast anyway. So don't forget to like.
And comment ideas so that we can be giving you all the content that you all want. And that's what
Yes.
it's all about. We're doing this for you guys. So comment those things so we can drive it to make it something more edifying and pleasing to you as well.
Absolutely. So let us know if there's something you want us to talk about, something that we didn't get to, a question you have for Justin. Heck, we can have anybody back on, and we can also send questions and address them later on. And we love feedback of all types. So keep that coming. All right. Without further ado, Justin, if you give us a bar or two, a few lines from a song as we end the recording here.
All right. I will do my best. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever, worthy of every breath we could ever. For you